There was a claim about the Talmud that states that the empty tomb was actually mentioned somewhere in the Talmud. Is there any truth to this?
No, it's nonsense. No, I mean it's just nonsense. I mean, there's a disagreement among scholars whether Jesus was ever mentioned in the Talmud. Now there is someone with that name. You go, really? Well, as it turns out, Yeshu or Yeshua. These were Yeshuas in the Jewish Bible, including a high priest, the nephew of Ezra. So there's a huge dispute whether the Jesus of Christianity is ever mentioned in the Talmud. Some it appears that it is not, although some people think that the Jews may have self-censored the Talmud so that it doesn't appear to be speaking about Jesus, so that it does not infuriate the Christians with whom life was not happy. And in simple terms, when the Jews were living in the Sasanian Empire, in the Persian Empire, meaning in southern Iraq, writing the Talmud in the 3rd century, in the 4th century, life was great. There were no Christians, and while the Jews were living in the Roman Empire as opposed to the Persian Empire, their lives were miserable, and the Jews of Babylon knew it, and they said it. They said in the Talmud, we know our brethren in the Roman Empire are living in hell because they were living under the church, and life was miserable. Life in the Persian Empire was fabulous. The 3rd, 4th, 5th Jews were free, relatively very free to write. Life was very, very good. So, but there is a thing that maybe that they had expressed ideas about Jesus that were unflattering, and then later on, as Christianity really moves in, so then the Jews self-censored it. It's hard to say. So it's a difficult call to make. But empty tomb is not there at all. But what happened, of course, that's nonsensical. There's nothing about that. But what happens is that Christians are in, many of them are very nice people. Are they in, I don't envy them. Meaning, I would not want to have to defend this. And how do you defend? This is indefensible. We read Isaiah 2, describing the Messianic age. The nations will stream to the highest mountain in Jerusalem, which will be above all other mountains. And the Torah will go out of Zion. The Messiah will reprove nations and judge between nations. The result of that is they will take their swords and spears and turn them into implements of agriculture. I mean, that's the Mashiach. In Isaiah 2, the first Messianic prophecy, nothing that the Messiah is supposed to die. And it's never on a Jews for Jesus, it's a no Jews for Jesus book, even though it's in the book of Isaiah. And it's in a Christian Bible. Maybe you think, the Christian, it's in there. They will never quote it. Why? There's nothing Christian about it. It's not Christy. It doesn't sound like Jesus, so it's not there. So, of course, they're in a stuck situation. They've got to scour the Jewish Bible. All they're going to come up with the verses are mistranslated, misquoted, taken out of context. So what they have to do is they have to say, it's in the Talmud. So they attack the Talmud. Let me tell you, if you go into a Messianic congregation, say the word Talmud, they're like, I don't know what you said. You think you're like the worst person that ever lived. They attack it as unrelenting. But if they can use the Talmud to somehow support their claims, they cherish the Talmud and hold it up as though it's the greatest thing that ever happened. So that's what they do. They've got to say, if it says an angel of the Lord in the Torah, that's got to be Jesus. If it says, I'll raise to you a prophet like Moses, it's got to be Jesus. It says in the Talmud, it's an empty tomb. It says it nowhere. And frankly, when someone reads this on the internet somewhere, what are they going to do? Open up a Babylonian Talmud of 6,500 pages written in Aramaic, and they'll go, oh, really? Oh, so the Jews are hiding it. They knew it the whole time. So the answer is it's nonsensical. It's a claim that's without merit, although I hear this constantly, they say in Talmud. You have to realize how the problem, there is a secondary point here, and that is they're claiming that the Talmud says that there wasn't actually an empty tomb. They're claiming that the Passover, we have 3 matzahs for the doctrine of the Trinity. They're claiming that the matzahs have holes because Jesus was pierced. They're claiming the matzahs have lines, stripes, because Jesus was scourged before the crucifixion. They're claiming that Jewish traditions, these are the traditions expressed by the Jewish people who do not believe in Jesus, we actually have inculcated Christian beliefs into our Talmud, into our Passover Seder, into all of this. Do you know what that means? You know what they're saying? That they're therefore stating, let's just take that to the next step. If that were the case, that means that the Jews deep down believe in Jesus, but we reject him anyway. We put holes in our matzah because Jesus was pierced, but we reject Jesus. Who would reject Jesus if they knew he was the Messiah? Only the devil. The Jews are the children of the devil, John 8:44. So they're really, you can answer you on a simple level, but on a deeper level, this is very, very toxic. Because this is the claim against the Jews of the church since time immemorial, even in the Gospels, that it's not that the Jews don't believe because they don't know, and if we just tell them, they would know, and then they would hear, and then they would believe. No. The Jews deep down know that Jesus is the Messiah, but reject him anyway. You see it in the Gospels, like when the Roman soldiers report back to Jewish authorities that Jesus rose, they bribe them to be quiet and to say they fell asleep. Who would do that? If they thought that Jesus rose from the dead, why didn't they just recognize him? Because the idea is that they're truly demonic. It's not that they're just wrong. It's the same thing done with the state of Israel. When you had the tragedy in Gaza with 4 Arab children were killed in the war, during the war with between Hamas and Israel, and they were killed during an attack on a beach. So all the anti-Israel forces, they didn't say that Israel wasn't careful enough. That's what they say about the Russians now. Russia is bombing Syria, and civilians are getting killed, and the claim is of Amnesty International is, so the Russians really want to kill civilians, why you wouldn't do that? But they're not being careful enough about collateral damage. That's the argument against Russia, but not for Israel. The claim against the Israeli Defense Forces is the IDF, those pilots knew their kids, and that's why they killed them. They're not even interested in adults. They are child killers. So these kind of bogus claims are there to advance a really a very dangerous idea. Not that the Jews don't believe, but really their rabbis, their leaders, and they themselves know the truth, but reject them anyway. And that's really what is conveyed in 2 Corinthians 3. The notion the Jews have a veil over their eyes, it's not logical. They have a veil, they have scales, and of course it's object nonsense. The Jews read their Jewish Bible, and there's no relationship between the claims of the church and the promises of the prophets. And that's, of course, so when Christians claim the Messiah is supposed to die, and the Messiah is really God in the flesh, and he died on a cross, the Jews are going, that's foolish, and it's also blasphemy. But so that's where this comes from. It really comes from a very it comes from a place of darkness, not a place of light.
I know I hear people quoting the Talmud, like you said, all the time to try to prove things, but it's really interesting. I keep referring back in my mind to what you had mentioned before. When you first said it, I didn't quite get it, but then it kind of it made sense because I spent a lot of time in the Messianic movement, about 3 years. It's like they will pretty much reject the oral Torah. They'll reject the law altogether. The oral law, but in everything that they do, is based on the oral law, even though they say they reject the whole thing. It's really just...
It is a very important point that you made. The Messianic movement's beliefs on salvation, on God's plan for salvation, is indistinguishable from what an Assemblies of God church espouses, a Southern Baptist church. I mean that to distinguish between charismatic. There's some Messianic churches that are charismatic, some that are not. There's no distinction between what they believe. You can press them. We're Jewish. We're more Jewish. How are you more Jewish? You wear Jewish stars. You wear talis. What? The answer is that it's just Jewish culture or oral Torah that they use, because oral Torah or rabbinic traditions that did develop, the oral Torah did not develop, frequently is more flamboyant, is more striking, and they want to pass themselves off as that we're Jewish, and we believe in Jesus, so it has to be true. Just in the same way that you have people, Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein as an example, who is one of the leading voices against the Jewish state. When he gets up to speak, go on YouTube, watch his speeches, he starts his speech off by talking about that he grew up from the child of Holocaust survivors, and parades his Jewish credentials, which is a reverse ad hominem fallacy. It's absurd, but he flashes these credentials and then he starts his speech. Can't accuse me of anti-Semite, I'm Jewish.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא